Quote, "For the new year, I still live, I still think, I still have to live, for I still have to think. Sum ergo cogito, cogito ergo sum. Today everybody permits himself the expression of his wish and his dearest thought. Hence I too shall say what it is that I wish for myself today, and what was the first thought to run across my heart this year. What thought shall be for me the reason, warranty, and sweetness of my life henceforth. I want to learn to see more and more as beautiful what is necessary in things. Then I shall be one of those who makes things beautiful. Amor fati, let that be my love henceforth. I do not want to wage war against what is ugly. I do not want to accuse. Looking away shall be my only negation. And all in all and on the whole, someday I wish to be only a yes-sayer." End quote. That's from the first section of Book 4 of the Gay Science, Sanctus Januarius, the section or the book of the gay science where Nietzsche's blood becomes liquid again. It is, of course, customary for us Nietzscheans to begin the year with this reading, perhaps in the same manner as Christians tend to read from the sections of the Gospels concerning the Nativity on Christmas. One could certainly interpret Nietzsche's passage for the new year in many ways. It could be a mission statement, a new moral orientation, it could be a doctrine, but above all, it is simply Nietzsche's very candid disclosure of his own New Year's wish. In modern language, we would say it is his New Year's resolution. But for my taste, I think it's better to speak of it as a wish. When we speak of resolutions, we are recapitulating to that popular prejudice of the will, that one can be resolved to act a certain way and in some sense force themselves into it. A wish, on the other hand, is simply an expression of a dream, a hope, a phantasm. It is a desire that may or may not be fulfilled, but reveals something about the inner life of the one who desires. And of course, for Nietzsche, that wish is to see as beautiful what is necessary, to love fate, and therefore to be only a yes-sayer. It is a wish to return to the innocence of becoming, to slake off the moral and metaphysical chains that we have placed on nature and on human life, shackling it to a certain fixed formula and condemning all which does not fit. I'm reminded of when the Maenads are freed from their chains, when Dionysus appears in the Bacchae by Euripides. Magically, miraculously, their shackles slip off and they are freed. For my part, I love this passage because Nietzsche speaks of a similar compulsion to my own compulsion. I still live, I still think, I still have to live, I still have to think. Philosophical thinking is never something that I have felt was a matter of choice. It's an impulse, it's an obsession, it's a hunger. And hopefully with my work on the podcast, I've been able to share some of the choicest delights from my own table of knowledge. As I said at the end of the Christmas special, 2025 was an amazing year. It's been a really wild ride. I'm incredibly thankful for all of you who are here with me on this journey, particularly the patrons who are supporting this journey and making it possible financially. And I'm full of anticipation about the new places and perspectives and vistas that we're going to explore in 2026. This summer, the podcast hits the 5-year mark, half a decade of the Nietzsche podcast. When I say that out loud, it's somewhat frightening to hear it in those terms in a way. I mean, just thinking about all the ways that I've changed and how my life has changed since that time, what a big share of a life 5 years is when, we only get so much time here. I mean, as Yang Chu said, 100 years is the limit of a long life. Well, it's certainly not the limit, but, that's like generally the most that any of us can hope for. And so, if I live to be 100 years old, then that's 5% of my life even still that I've spent on the Nietzsche podcast, which is just strange to think about. And then, just all the thoughts of who I was and what I was like when I started the podcast, and even in that span of time, how so much is different now. But you know what they say, the more things change, the more they stay the same. This is a special short episode, mostly just an announcement and some updates. The announcement is I'm teaching a course starting January 14th at Acid Horizon Research Commons. I've mentioned this in a couple interviews. It was mentioned in the Christmas special, but I just wanted to do a special episode announcement for it. The seating is limited to only 35 spots. And since I'm recording this a week or so ahead of releasing it, because I'm about to go on Christmas vacation and I'm going to go see my family on Christmas, and then I'm going out on sort of a personal vacation for New Year's. But, I have no idea if any seats will remain available by the time this announcement comes out. But the beautiful thing about AHRC is that all of the courses taught there will be archived. So those who aren't able to take the classes live, if they sign up later, will gain access to that material. At least I think that's the case. The topic of this course is Nietzsche's experiment with truth, and it's a deep dive into the Nietzschean view of truth. I've tried to avoid classifying this course as an exploration of Nietzsche's metaphysics, even though that term could be used, because I think Nietzsche's view of truth is incredibly physical. His question is more so with the pursuit of truth. He doesn't understand truth in a disembodied sense separate from the desire for it, so impulse is always involved, which ties us to the physical world, sort of takes us down from the level of metaphysics. His whole notion of truth is just a reorientation of how we think about it, even down to the method of how we approach thinking about it. And fundamentally, I will argue that Nietzsche's method is always experimental. His conclusions are provisional. His manner of approaching questions varies according to context, and he doesn't attempt to produce universal doctrines. The course will consist of 4 talks given live, along with Q&A periods. While I have mentioned some of the sources and excerpts and ideas that I'm using for the course in the 4 years since I've been doing this podcast, ultimately there's nothing within the library or the archives of the Nietzsche podcast that covers this same swath of material in this kind of depth and gives the kind of interpretations I'm going to give, of this sort of overarching interpretation of Nietzsche's pursuit of truth. The first talk will be The Struggle Against Plato, a deep analysis of the preface to Beyond Good and Evil, an attempt to contrast the Platonic view of truth with that of Nietzsche, particularly looking at Plato's Cratylus. We understand his approach to the question of truth as part of this contest with Plato, as a critique of Platonism, and thus as an inversion of the traditional and commonly held metaphysical ideas. Then, Truth as Circe is the next talk, which is a line from Human All Too Human. Quote, "Error has turned animals into men. Perhaps truth could turn man into animals again." End quote. That's the title of the aphorism Truth as Circe. In this talk, we attempt to understand how Nietzsche sees the knowledge drive, both separating man from nature and connecting him to it. It also involves Nietzsche's critique of Darwin, his attempt to put forward the idea of how nature could be overcome. Then, the will to truth as the will to power. This third talk will involve an extensive analysis of Nietzsche's notes assembled in Will to Power, and particularly the notes on the will to truth and on knowledge, what it means to reconceive of the will to truth as an expression of will to power, all of the implications of this. And finally, Thinking Becoming. We'll look at the notes for Zarathustra, consider some of Thus Spoke Zarathustra's core concepts. We'll take another look at the death of God. We'll also compare Nietzsche to Heraclitus, and overall just try to understand how it is that Nietzsche goes about propagating this new style of thinking, or encouraging this new style of thinking that doesn't recapitulate to the errors of Platonic being. Now, along with these talks, I've prepared supplementary materials and readings so that students have the text of the excerpts that we're discussing, and with the question and answer period, it will be much more interactive and allow for student participation and discussion. And I'm really excited about this, because Craig from Acid Horizon he has a really incredible docket of lecturers lined up. First of all, the topics involve, during this spring semester, I guess we call it, they involve philosophy and magic, Kant, acid communism, so much more. And they're also doing a Deleuze reading group. And Craig is he's a stand-up guy, and I really get the sense that he's doing this for the love of the game, the love of philosophy and sharing ideas, to satisfy, this compulsion that we still live, therefore we still think, and we have to, therefore, think. And that was part of what motivated me to do this. This is the first time I've ever signed on with someone else. The first time I've ever really in any way tied my destiny, and even in any small sense, to someone else. And hopefully if someone listening is financially able to attend and has the time, wants to put in the effort and so on, there will still be some seats available. If not, the classes will be archived. More than that, I just wanted to share my excitement with all of you. I'll put a link in the description to go check out AHRC. I also want to make it clear that the podcast will keep going during this time. There will be regular episodes of the podcast coming out as I'm teaching the course, so not to worry about that. Also, I'm producing some extra material for the patrons that I'm planning to keep exclusive to the Patreon. Patrons listening will know that usually the content on Patreon is early material, sometimes much earlier than the public gets access to it, as well as access to Q&As and miscellaneous or experimental content. And I've got like 2 conversations with Weltgeist that are either totally exclusive to Patreon or like the extended version of the conversation is. And we're going to do more of those in the future. I've also come up with some episode ideas that are going to remain patron exclusive. One I have planned is an episode on Han Feizi, the legalist scholar influenced by the Taoist tradition. And the episode will compare him to Machiavelli and Nietzsche. I thought about doing this episode as part of this like Chinese philosophy excursion. It didn't really fit in anywhere, though, and I thought the patrons would enjoy having something special, so I'm going to try and do more stuff like that in the future. Other than that, I'm not exactly sure I can give a schedule for what I plan to cover this coming year. Rest assured, we're going to continue to go into new territory, while, of course, revisiting old favorites. And at least some of the figures that you've been asking me for will be covered. I'm always getting requests for what to talk about, and I try to oblige the audience to some extent, but I don't really want to say which ones I'm covering yet, because I can never exactly control the flow of my interests or the direction of my knowledge drive. I have to sort of find the book or the thinker or the topic that captivates my interest at a given moment and give myself over to that. And I can plan it out to some extent, but there's still a free-form element to planning the podcast, still a spontaneous element. And the topic of the course I'm teaching, for instance, this was just sort of the idea that gripped me. I don't know why it was that aspect of Nietzsche that I wanted to talk about, but that's what ended up happening. That's what I ended up doing. And I suppose maybe it's just because the problem of knowledge, or however we want to put it, the indeterminacy or the flux of the basis of knowledge has always fascinated me. Ever since the first time I encountered these ideas, critiquing the usual ways of approaching philosophy that you get. The first time I ever read Beyond Good and Evil, that stuck with me, even when I didn't understand most of the text. This aspect of Nietzsche's philosophy has always drawn me in and lingered in my mind long after putting down his books. But I can tell you, in the immediate future, I'm doing an episode on Ge Ling Shang's comparison of Zhuangzi and Nietzsche. If you've been paying attention, you already know this. I've already sort of teased that in episodes. And then I will be speaking with a scholar who I may or may not have spoken to before a long time ago, who's also familiar with Eastern philosophy and Nietzsche. That will be at the end of the month. After that, we're probably heading back west as far as the philosophical interest on the show. Does that mean we're not going back east again in the future? I mean, I'm not going to say that. Many have asked me in light of recent topics to talk about Buddhist or Hindu philosophy. I'm unsure about that. It would probably be very easy for me to cover Zen Buddhism and some of the schools of Buddhism that influenced it because of my past experience with Zen. So, for example, I've thought about for a long time talking about the Lankavatara Sutra, which it's one of the most incredible books I've ever read. It's obviously a Buddhist sutra. It comes from the mind-only school. It's actually like the foundational text of the mind-only school. Or I think that's actually associated with Yogacara, but those two schools like kind of intersect or overlap. But I've thought about talking about this, maybe in comparison to the Timaeus by Plato, or to the, comparing it to the work of Berkeley. Maybe even doing a whole idealism series, looking at those examples from Western philosophy, and then looking at the Lanka. The Lanka, as the sutra is called for short, it's recorded in the very earliest sources we have about Zen coming to China, that Bodhidharma, the legendary founder of Zen, when he came to China, taught the Lankavatara, that his school was called the Lankavatara School. And it's just funny to me because pretty much no one reads this text today. I mean, unless people are total nerds, like philosophy nerds, basically. But Zen actively discourages you from that kind of thing. But Red Pine produced a really great translation of the Lanka in English with like really helpful notes to it. But so like that's sort of what I would want to talk about is like this, the really deep philosophical sort of foundations of Zen are really what interests me these days more so than Zen itself. It's really hard to talk about Zen, like the actual texts, the lineage texts are, they can just be interpreted in so many ways. It's even arguable that they don't really have a meaning or a philosophical meaning, or that, you know, whatever that meaning might be, that isn't Zen, whatever Zen is, right? That Zen is not conveyed through words and letters. So that's the kind of odd thing about Zen. It has this whole literary tradition associated with it, but it's sort of insisted upon by the practitioners that that doesn't have to do with Zen itself, which is a sort of experience or the wordless transmission of this sort of realization or something like that. But in any case, like according to the earliest historical sources, when Zen came to China, it was the Lankavatara school. That's how it started out. But anyway, long digression, but that's sort of like, if I was going to go further on an Eastern philosophy route, that's what I would talk about, because at least at the moment, that's what I have the greatest command of that kind of material. But I don't really know if there's interest in any of that. It's very esoteric, and I don't know. Let me know what you think in the comments. You know, let me know if you're interested in any of that. I think the other thing too is I could definitely see doing an episode of like Nietzsche's view on Buddhism, which I've kind of touched on through other episodes, but that might be helpful to do an episode exclusively about that and exhaustively about that. But other than that, I'm very uncertain about sort of like, other than the immediate future, I'm very uncertain about exactly what the schedule for the podcast is going to be for the rest of the season. I can tell you I'm covering more literature, more poets, and more of that side of things the longer that we go on with the podcast. And we'll always get back to philosophy and ideas, but I just want to include sort of more, you know, Nietzsche's a very artistic philosopher, very lyrical philosopher. And there are just so many great insights you can draw in doing like literary analysis or criticism from Nietzsche, or that you can apply. So that all greatly interests me as well. But I'm going to have a lot of time to work on all of this, because after a year of touring and lots of regional and local shows with my band, you know, we did 4 tours last year. We released an album. We played some really incredible local and regional shows, a lot of amazing festivals and events. We just had a really busy year, and so we're going to take a bit of a breather for a few months. It's not a hiatus. We're still going to be playing locally. We're also not only recording something kind of special right now, but we're also working on writing the 3rd album and sort of finishing. We've already written most of that, but we're in sort of a revising and perfecting stage and sort of finishing a lot of the songs. So we're still like working creatively, but you know, you kind of have this pulse, this rhythm with being in a band where you go pitch yourself out into the world, put yourself out there and make fans, tour, sell stuff, see the country, be as active as possible. But then it almost requires that to really be creative, you got to withdraw a little bit. I mean, the other big reason, by the way, is that my other guitarist is going to be off on tour with her other band. They're releasing their album this year. They're touring the US and Europe. Very excited for them to have that experience. And, you know, so we put out our album last year. She's in 2 touring bands. Now the other band's putting out their album. They just got signed, so they're going to be very active. You know, I've been touring in bands for 13 years now, or I guess almost 14. And it's not really a big deal to have to replace someone on tour or get a touring musician, but it's a lot harder with this band where all the members are very distinctive in what they bring, like their creative, artistic voice to the project. It's very hard for me to imagine doing a Slumbering Sun tour without her. You know, it wouldn't be impossible, but it's just, the timing is right to take a step back, take a breather, kind of withdraw, do a little bit more of the creative side of things, and then we'll return to hitting the road in the latter half of the year. But thankfully, that sort of development gives me a couple of months, or about half of the year really, to focus on my para-academic activities and on the podcast. So I'm hoping, again, that I'll be able to produce more exclusive material for the patrons and just get my hands in more things on the podcast front and in terms of my studies and research and writing for the immediate future. And that includes finishing, revising my book, my upcoming book, which, I've been talking about that for more than a year now, but it's a long process, guys. It takes quite a bit to write a book that is not just, this ain't going to be slop, all right? This is going to be quality. And it takes a long time to revise something and sculpt what might normally be, just a draft or an ordinary effort into something extraordinary, high quality. So, I have no idea when it would come out, when it would be published, but at the very least, I think I'm going to be totally finished with the book, definitely within the first couple months of the year. All right, that's it, everyone. Those are all the main updates for right now. I will, put a link to AHRC in the description if you want to go check that out. Thank you to all my patrons. Thank you to everyone. Happy New Year. I love all of you because I love mankind. That is to say, as Zarathustra loves mankind, not for what it is, but for what it could become. So amor fati, let that be my love henceforth. I'm thankful to have lived another beautiful year on this earth, and thank you for accompanying me on the journey. Signing off.